Arf, great to be here. Thank you.
And Michael Johns, you are the visiting professor of politics at York University. It's a pleasure to be here with you as well.
You too. Thank you.
Here we are. A couple years ago or a year ago, we probably didn't think we'd be here, and then suddenly 32 days, is it?
36.
Okay, see, I already stand corrected. This is going to be a great night. 36 days ago, or we're 36 days into this latest campaign, and the pollsters are saying it's anybody's game. It's close as of yesterday. But there definitely are some talking points, and one of the biggest talking points I think we'll all agree is, what are we doing here and why are we here? Michael, your thoughts on that?
Well, it's certainly this was a big gamble by the Prime Minister, and if the polling is accurate, it probably didn't pay off in that he was hoping that sort of this was the window in which people were feeling good about the number of vaccines that were handed out. The COVID numbers were relatively low across the country, that people would be feeling good, and that this would lead to a Liberal majority. There's a pathway for that still. It's getting unlikely, and at the end of the day, we are having this election in the middle of COVID. We can talk a little bit about whether it was necessary and whether all the parties were really as much against it as they claimed once the election took place. But certainly it is one of the more unusual elections we will see.
I want to get into that in just a moment about how unusual it actually is. Ron, you were talking earlier, you said you've had your ear to the ground, so to speak. You were speaking with people, you've heard talk with people, and you said that there were people in the polling stations saying, now that I'm standing here, I'm really wondering why I'm here, and that's going to impact which way I go.
Well, I never really talked to anybody who had that experience, but I wonder, a $600 million election in the middle of the pandemic, and people are a little tired and mentally fatigued from the the lockdowns and all of the talk and the focus on the deaths and and all of the information, and maybe just standing in line an extra hour, being warned that you're going to be probably spending more time polling booths today because of the requirements of the pandemic, might just get people ticked off and maybe change their vote.
Well, let me ask you
but
this.
I'll tell you this, sure. Yeah. If I could just finish.
Yeah.
There is a lot. I sense there is a lot of anger out there, and again, I'm not a pollster, and I don't have any definitive information. Just from chatting with other people and stuff and hearing what they have to say, there's a general sort of disgruntlement, I'm going to say, out there about this election and
well, that's what I was going to ask you about.
Prime Minister.
That's what I was going to ask you about, Ron. People are saying businesses have struggled. Small business certainly has struggled. Obviously, there are people who haven't been able to see their loved ones for a period of time, some for 18 months, etc. Is this the right time? Is there nothing better that we should be doing right now that the people need help, business community needs help, the healthcare system needs help? You're already elected, you've already got your seat in government. Why are you making new promises when you should be following through right now?
There are people who believe that this should be a reset. There's an opportunity to kind of let's take a look and just make sure that we're on the right path, and that this is really a good idea. But again, like any other election, it's going to be, well, how many people really felt that way, and how is the vote going to turn out as a result of that. But elections are always fun, and even though we try to predict them, often very unpredictable.
Well, great segue. Michael, this is your profession. Yeah. This is what you do. Ron, you've been doing this for, as we said earlier, about 30 years. Over that period of time, I'm not going to say 30 years, I don't know how long you've been doing it, to be honest.
Getting up there, yeah.
Okay, so over that period of time, you're likely to have seen trends. You're likely to have been able to look at what are some of the factors and data sets, et cetera, and make some relatively educated predictions. Now, of course, last time, I don't know that anybody necessarily predicted the red wave that we saw, but there are signs and indicators. This time around, though, there are some variables, and one of those variables, obviously, is COVID. How does that mess with tradition? How does that change the data set for you as this one major variable?
I think what we're seeing right now is that even pollsters who are appearing to be very confident, in the back of their minds, they have to have doubts, because there are, in any election, something can happen. There could be an international event that changes perspective. A candidate can do something catastrophic, and that changes everything. But in this election, where you don't actually have that, we still have an enormous number of unknowns. We don't know what voter turnout is going to be. We don't know if it's a low voter turnout, who those people are. Normally you would assume in a low voter turnout scenario, that's really good for conservatives, because the highest voting group of people are above the age of 60, and they more than the others vote conservative. But is this an election where the elderly don't want to risk getting COVID, and therefore they don't show up?
Oh, interesting.
And so you actually have a different group of small number of voters. We don't know that. We don't know what the PPC's influence is going to be. We also don't fully know who they are. We assume a lot of them are going to be conservative, and they're on the far right. But they've run a one-issue campaign, which is anti-vax, anti-mask. There are people on the left, there are people in the center who are anti-vax and anti-mask who would leave the Liberals and the NDP, and they're then moving here. So these are things we do not know. We don't know what the impact of the Green Party having problems. So we think we know what might happen. We don't know what might happen tonight.
Well, there's our show for tonight, folks. Thanks for tuning in. No, I mean, I think you brought up some great points, and those really are them. Let's talk about some of those. Mail-in ballots are obviously on deck, and I think that it will have an impact. Obviously, it's how can we make sure that everybody has access to their voice being heard or their voice being counted by way of mail-in ballots. We don't know what that number is. We know how many went out, but we don't know how many are going to come back in. And I do think that is a factor of, will there be a certain sense of voter apathy, or is there a sense that, oh, I missed it, I didn't get the mail-in time, and it's not going to count, and I'm not comfortable to be around other people, because that is the seed that has been sown. We need to social distance. I'm not comfortable to go out. I'm immune compromised, et cetera. So that is definitely going to be a factor. I've also heard, and I don't know, I mean, I don't know, just through Twitter and all these different things, that there is some concern from pollsters around the demographics, around how many females are going to vote, and is that down this year, and what does that mean? Is that a statement in itself, or how is that going to play? Who's traditionally voting? Who are the female voters who come out en masse typically voting for? And is there a way to call that?
Well, we have history, but I think what we are seeing, and certainly we've all brought it up, is that this is because this is an election during COVID where people are fatigued, people are angry. We're seeing different groups of people being energized. When we look at polling, the divide between men and women in not just Canada but around the world is becoming very stark. That men are voting more to the right, women are voting more to the center and to the left. And like I said, this is this was how Joe Biden won in the United States. It's how other parties have won in Europe. So if there's one demographic that has ended up sitting out an election, whether it is older people, whether it is women, whether it is either young, that will affect this, because even with the pollsters and their level of confidence, they all acknowledge that there's about 30 to 35 seats across the country that are within 1 or 2% of each other.
Wow.
That's the difference between a majority and a minority, and that's the difference between a conservative plurality and a liberal plurality.
So Ron, I mean, we've got, there's popular vote and there's seat count.
Yep.
And so that's obviously going to be a factor. So when there are that many seats at play and you have this much of a discrepancy, what is your gut instinct telling you? What are Canadians saying right now?
Well, one of the things that really stands out in my mind, I haven't heard it. I haven't heard it anywhere else, but I thought that was really great. Mr. Trudeau is the face of the pandemic. So every day he was on television, very solemn, talking about all the things we're going to do. And the communication, he gets A++ for communication and being there and letting us know exactly what was happening, what the government response was going to be, how they were going to tackle the next thing. But from a political perspective, and you were talking about the how people are feeling about this particular election, familiarity breeds contempt. And there's some politicians who have said in the past that you don't want to be out in front of the public too much, just enough, but not too much. So I'm wondering if some of these folks that were the face of the pandemic were out there just too much, and I just want to get rid of the pandemic and everything associated with it. Goodbye.
Let me throw this out at you then. A few years ago, there was this incredible movement that happened in Canada that I don't know that anybody predicted, and it was called Sunny Ways. And it was a message of hope, and it was a message of positivity, and Trudeau was the face of that message, and that was the sweep across Canada.
Yep.
The same person who is the face of the party, as I'm hearing from you, and I certainly don't disagree with you, has been that darker, more somber, more hesitant voice out there. We need to be safe. Times are tough. It's dark moments right now. What's that going to do for his results?
Well, I think it also, anytime you were in government for any period of time, you have a history then. It's one thing to come in as the hope candidate. Then you have to govern. And governing is hard, and governments make mistakes, governments do things that are unpopular, and then you now have a history. So running, the idea that you could run on another Sunny Ways, having been in 6 years and having some of the problems that the government had, that was never going to work. And so I think one of the reasons why you have the election right now, going back to your very first question, is that when he called the election, I think what you saw was the attempt of saying, okay, forget the past, we're going to run an election on the future. The SNC-Lavalin land, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
The JWR, she's gone, don't worry about it. Now we're going to talk about the world post-COVID. And then unfortunately what ends up happening is you have a Nova Scotia election in which a very competent government who did very well in handling the pandemic got blown out.
Yeah.
And that kind of took the wind out of that argument. And so it puts the Liberals in a really weird position of trying to run on the future without talking about the thing that is leading to the future. And what we might see tonight is one of the reasons why that didn't work is that people are angry, they're tired of it, there are all these different things. I just don't know if any of the other parties were able to capitalize and talk on the record.
That's a great point. I think you hit the nail on the head. I couldn't agree more.
So let's talk about that for a second. First and foremost, you mentioned, before we came on the air, you mentioned something about the greatest gift to O'Toole was the fact that it's a short election, or a short campaign.
Yeah, as we've seen with the polling, that when the election was called, clearly there was people who were upset. The Liberals were at a certain point, they immediately dropped, like 6-7%.
Yeah, it was big.
In like a week, which is quite impressive in politics. As the campaign has gone on, and the Liberals have moved from a campaign of this is what we're going to do to this is what Aaron O'Toole would do if he's the Prime Minister, we have seen that be very effective. And O'Toole's had a couple of own goals. He handled the gun issue very poorly. He hasn't been helped by the government in Alberta, the government in Ontario. And over time, we've seen this decline in the Conservative support, where at one point they looked like they were easily going to be winning at least a minority government. And now they're possibly leading back to where they started. If this was the shortest possible campaign you can have, the law in Canada is the shortest campaign you can have is 36 days. If it was 42 or 48, the way the polling was going, we could be looking at a pretty easy Liberal majority.
So
his timing.
Yeah.
Just his timing.
And that's an interesting thought. I mean, listen, the Conservatives needed to reinvent themselves. I think by all standards, Mr. Scheer, he had a hard fight, but it was relatively underwhelming in terms of the resonance that he had with the Canadian public. And so, Mr. O'Toole came in as leader, and I think that there's been a fair amount of sentiment or argument that Canadians didn't get a chance to know him over the last short period of time. Or maybe he didn't do enough to get known. And then suddenly, boom, right out of the gate, they were the first to launch their platform, and he owned the conversation, and he guided the conversation right out of the gate. Now, as we're seeing, the numbers are very tight, as you said. I mean, it's gotten tighter towards the end. And what do you think about that trend, Ron? And what does that mean for the Conservative Party?
Yeah, you know what? Like, I want to speak about the trends, but I just got this sneaking suspicion something else is going on, and I really, I'm that guy that's saying, well, I don't know. From what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, it just, I don't know, it doesn't make any sense. So that point that you made earlier, Michael, about, you know, the number of seats that are within 1 or 2%, that'll tell the tale.
It will, won't it?
Because all this stuff about percentage of vote, I'm looking at some results now on the screen here in the studio, and Liberals have a 42% of the popular vote. Well, the poll said they had 30. Well, this happens to be in the East Coast, where their popular vote is really quite strong. So see how that plays out. Yet the Conservatives have actually won some seats down there.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
With only 32% of the vote. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how it shakes out.
So let's take a moment locally, just to discuss locally. There are some people who have put their name forward. They have exposed themselves. The vulnerability of putting your name forward and taking a stand, regardless of which party you go for, to represent. And one person at a time is elected. And there's a member who's been a sitting Conservative for a number of years, who's had a very solid career, and he's decided that it's time. It's time. And so Bruce Stanton has decided to call it a day. And I think we have some footage. We have an interview with Bruce, I believe. So why don't we take a look at that real quick?
Hi, welcome. We're here at beautiful Couchiching Beach Park in Orillia, and a pleasure to be with a person who probably needs no introduction, but Bruce Stanton, MP of this wonderful, wonderful community. How are you?
Great to be here, Ron. Yeah, it's delight and great to see you again. It's been some time, and appreciate all your good work in bringing these kinds of stories to the viewers here in this part of Simcoe County.
Well, you're on the cusp of being former MP.
Yes.
And your thoughts about your retirement?
Well, I mean, what comes to mind, of course, I mean, first of all, it doesn't seem like nearly 16 years that it was when we started into this. As the summertime of 2005, we were just ahead of an election that I ran in and won. It eventually was in January of 06 when that happened, and then here we are almost 16 years later, and looking back at a time that was exciting and a real honor to be part of, to serve this community, and some great memories and wonderful people that we've met along the way.
So when you think about your career, your almost 16-year career, the question that I have is, what drew you into politics in the first place, and more specifically, federal politics? What was it? Was it that drew you in?
It's hard to really put your finger on it in sort of one aspect, but we had grown up, 4 kids in our family. We'd grown up in a family where our parents were involved in political life in some ways. Dad was in municipal politics. Mom and Dad were both active in the local, federal, and provincial PC association, as it was at that time. And then after I graduated from college and came back to work in the family business, it wasn't long after that I went out and attended my first big nomination meeting. They were nominating at that time Doug Lewis in 1979.
Oh, Mr. Lewis, yeah.
This was to replace our candidate at that time, Philip B. Reinard, P.B. Reinard as he was known, and he had held the riding for 22 years. And so they were electing this new candidate to carry on from PB's legacy. And it was just an exciting event. 2,500 people at that thing, at the first event at the roller skating rink at Otis Park. So it kind of excited an interest in public life myself, a continuation of that. And over my years while I was working in my career, I volunteered for the local riding association. I never imagined I would run and be a candidate or an MP for that matter, but that's kind of the roots of it.
So you won the election, the first one, and you go to Ottawa. What was that sort of first time experience like? Was it what you expected?
Well, it's so hard to, because you just absolutely have no concept of what it's going to be like until you're actually in those shoes. But I can tell you, walking up the center walkway past the Centennial Flame towards center block of Parliament Hill is an amazing and awe-inspiring moment, because you realize you're part of something that has such rich history. And you know, it's still, even to this day, even 15, 16 years later, to be up there and imagine that you've had the privilege of being part of that for a short while is just, you know, it goes right to your core.
Yeah.
You know, it's something you never forget. Standing those first moments in the House of Commons and making a speech, the little light on your console goes on, and you know the microphones are live.
What was your first speech?
I think my first words in the House of Commons was actually, I was up on, in speeches in the House, when a member makes a 10-minute speech, there's a period of 5 minutes there where any member can stand up with the idea of getting recognized by the Speaker to pose a question to the member who just spoke, to ask them or make a comment about what they just said. So my first comment was to I think it was a Bloc Québécois member at that time, Bernard, it wasn't Bernard Sauvageau, but it was a member for Repentigny.
Oh, really?
I can't remember his name. Yes, and so I said a few words in response to his speech. Not in French at that time. Later I could do it in French, but in 2006, no, not a chance. But that's what it was. And a maiden speech, I was just, you usually start off by thanking the people of Simcoe North for electing me and giving me the privilege to be their voice, and so on.
Neat, very neat. So when you reflect back of the 15 years, personal highs and lows, what are some of the things that you really feel like, wow, I was really happy I did that, or what your accomplishments? Yeah,
most often the highs, those gratifying moments, are those things that you've been able to do to serve somebody here in the riding. So with our staff in the riding, we help them solve problems
things
and issues.
Like what?
Well, I mean, as an example, I mean, a family, a low-income family, maybe didn't realize that they were eligible for a particular family benefit of some kind, and they come across it. They reach out to your office for help, and lo and behold, they'll get some back benefit issue that they didn't even know that they could get, sometimes $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 for a family that, is having a difficult time getting by already. So having the ability
So, I'm starting to get this picture that the reward comes from helping individuals in your riding, as opposed to the big, view that you get of the legislation that we're going to do that's going to change the world. I guess the question I want to ask you is, does Parliament work? When we watch TV, we see, the little snippets from question period, and they're usually sort of outrageous sort of statements or some sort of event that occurred. Does Parliament work?
It does, actually. There's no doubt that lately it has become a little bit more, if I could say, it can become a bit more inflammatory and personal. Partly because of the nature of what members of Parliament, and actually any elected public official, are dealing with now. Social media, anonymous commentary that you can be the subject of, that is very heartbreaking, because it's directed at you personally. Some of that gets picked up in how people interact in the House.
In our world, we call that bullying.
Yes. But in there, you have to, you're an elected public official, you've got to deal with it.
Yeah.
But you're a person too.
Yes.
And it hurts, right? But at the same time, I mean, that does impact, but I will say to the main point, yes, it does work. And I've seen it over my years, and especially as a chair occupant, as I'll call it. I was an assistant speaker, a deputy speaker in the House of Commons. And to be able to see the hard work of MPs, the way that they work to put their arguments together, always pros and cons. The government, bringing its prerogative and its commitments to bring certain pieces of programs and changes in laws, and at the same time seeing an effective opposition rank of MPs that do everything they can to point out the pitfalls or gaps. They raise points, they press the government to make sure that those laws can be the best they can be. And even though it's messy, it does work.
You worked on a number of different committees, but you're well known for your present role as Deputy Speaker. In fact, in a recent tribute to you that was sort of sprung upon you, I think it was just last week, people from all sides of the House said some really nice things, and some of these were the words that were used to describe your conduct in the House and your role specifically as Deputy Speaker: grace, professionalism, courage, honorable. You ran your parliamentary sessions under the Stanton rule. Tell us about that. And where does that come from?
That was Peter Julian, and a long time. He's been there as long as I have been, and he's still there. I think he's running for re-election, and I hope he is anyway. He's a great MP. But what it comes down to is in the role of a chair occupant, you're there to be of service to the members, to make sure the rules are followed.
Chair occupant?
Yes,
it doesn't deputy speaker sound so much better.
It does, it's true. But there are two other assistant deputies as well, and then the principal speaker, Anthony Rhoda, and I had the privilege of serving 3 different speakers in my time, and it was just wonderful to be able to be part of that. But what you're there, the reason that I think some of those accolades came my way is because when I was doing my duty there, I learned all their names, all the riding names, and when I was chairing and presiding, I would make a point to look at them, when they were presenting their speeches. And so you not only listen to what it is they're saying, but also, you can also pick up some things to make sure that if a question, a point of order does come up, that you've got a good sense of what's going on and, what potential problem might have been there. So I think members get a sense that you are engaged and you're listening. They speak better when someone's listening to you. You up your game a little bit, believe it or not. And it's just like when you have an audience, you're talking to an audience.
So the other question is, was there anybody that wasn't like that? But you can't answer that question. It's okay.
No, they all do a great job.
Yeah, of course. Bruce, what's next for Bruce Stanton, and what's next for Canada?
Well, 2 big questions there.
Yeah.
Probably the second one, more consequential, I would say, but for Heather and I, probably for the immediate few months, we're really just going to kind of wind down a little bit and take almost a kind of an at-home sabbatical of sorts to just, catch our breath, not make any real commitments. We are hoping to do a little bit of traveling when things open up again in the U.S. and certainly in other parts of Canada. But no real immediate plans other than taking some time just to kind of collect ourselves and maybe might get back into music. I mean, music's a passion for me from back in the years when I was in Park Street and in the band and in drama those years. And I think, they tell me that music actually keeps you young, Ron. So, I'm all for those kinds of things.
Sure.
And for the country, as I mentioned, I think for all parliamentarians and provincial legislatures dealing with this post-pandemic period where we have to reckon with those big expenditures and commitments to Canadians in a reasonable way over a period of time so that we can get back and rebuild and do our bit. But at the same time, we've got some big issues to tackle there around, finding the level that we need with our commitments to climate change mitigation, and at the same time to our friends and neighbors who are Indigenous in Canada, that they feel a part of our country and are proud to be and share in the incredible fortune that we have as Canadians.
Yeah, super. Bruce, thanks so very much for taking the time to be with us, and thank you so very much for your 15 years of service trying to do the very best that you felt you should be doing for Canadians and your constituents.
Well, it was a real privilege, and I thank you, sir.
Yeah,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
So that's one of the standard and how would you say it? A common theme that comes out of or a candidate or a sitting MP who chooses to retire, and that is sort of the humility and the recognition that it was a privilege to serve, and obviously that's certainly reflected in Mr. Stanton's interview with you, Ron. What was it like, though, now that he's retired and the pressure's off and he's not running for re-election? Was there an air of the interview?
No, Bruce was always a very approachable guy. I think we were a little lighter conversation and have not talked about the issues as much as maybe we did in the past. But I just want to draw this. The one thing that I really liked about Bruce Stanton, and I love about a lot of politicians, regardless of what party they ran for, he's a real stand-up, polite kind of guy. In my opinion, he's Canadian. You know, he's very generous in his talk. He's very he's just a really super guy, and the kind of thing you think that everybody in politics are sitting around discussing issues and ideas and ways to go. I mean, it's sort of like I've got this utopian vision in my head, which doesn't exist. But he was a commendable guy that
You said he was also a no-nonsense fellow when it came to decorum.
Well, no nonsense in the sense that he didn't put up with the. I mean, we see these things on question, in question period, and we talked about that in the interview, and those things don't look good, and it tends to be the type of incidents that the media tends to focus on when somebody gets a little snarly or snippy or maybe uses some foul language. He tried to suppress that as much as possible and tried to get the House of Commons to operate with some decorum and some civility, which I said to him, it didn't work. No, but I mean, and I love that about the guy and what he did. Yeah.
So, Michael, in Simcoe North, there's no incumbent. Mm-hmm. How does that change the dynamic? I mean, traditionally speaking, it's been a relatively safe conservative riding, but there is no incumbent, so none of the candidates essentially have a relationship with the public.
They don't, and so in some ways it is a little bit different in terms of name recognition. Certainly, you can run on your name if you're well known. In a place like Simcoe North, however, at sometimes the party is more important than the individual, and moreover, the machine that exists. And so he may not be well known, the person running for the Conservative Party in Simcoe North, but if you have people who are well known, I'm sure Bruce Stanton has been campaigning for the Conservative candidate. My guess is the Dunlops, Garfield Dunlop, Jill Dunlop, and others, and other city councilors and things. You have that advantage in a place like Simcoe North for the Conservatives, where in Toronto Centre, it's the exact same thing except it's the Liberal Party, or in downtown Windsor, it's the NDP. That once you get the machine going, you may not have the name recognition, but you do have the name recognition of other people who are supporting you and the brand. And so even being a new candidate, you do start with a bit of a competitive advantage.
So we're hearing word that it's not necessarily going to be the shortest evening. We've talked about mail-in ballots, so we don't know when those numbers are going to come in. We also know that in some ridings there's a 2 to 3 hour lineup right now. So we're going to take a moment, though, to go remote, and we're going to speak with Madison Fitzpatrick, who is at incumbent Doug Shipley's
Hi, we're here at
party, if you will.
Queen's.
We're starting in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is the 44th election campaign here. We're at We're here at the Queen's nightclub in Barrie, downtown Barrie on Dunlop Street. It's the 44th election. It's a COVID campaign, virtual election, virtual debates that we've been seeing for the past couple of weeks. It's a completely different way of doing an election. Now, voting was today. Mail-in voting was 1.2 million mail-in ballots, and that's a lot more than 2019 when there was only 50,000 mail-in votes. So, but before this whole election day started today, 5.8 million people voted in the advance polls. So that counting has started. Now, there were fewer polling stations this year because obviously stricter protocols at school boards not wanting the voters to be inside. Totally understandable, but the GTA, their polling stations were very, very busy today. Some even in Wasaga Beach, people had to wait 1 hour just to get in to vote. So some frustration there, but Election Canada says that if you do have, your mail-in ballot or your actual ballot, and if you are in line, we're in line at 9:30. Stay in line. You still are eligible to vote. So make sure that you stay in line. And Election Canada also saying, be kind to our volunteers that are there. We're all going through this rough time, this pandemic. So just be kind and yeah, so we're following along here at Rogers TV BC. Their cutoff time is 10 p.m. local time, so we do have some waiting game to do here. But yeah, stay tuned at Rogers TV Barrie, and we'll have all the coverage for you. Back to you guys in the studio.
Well, thank you very much for that, Madison, and I'm sure we'll be back to you. I know it's loud in the room. There's a lot of excitement in there, so folks at home, please bear with us. So there's obviously, it remains a waiting game. Lots to talk about, though, different parts of the country and other contributing factors, and we've been sort of going through what are some of the variables and what are some of the anomalies of this election. And one thing that comes to mind, fewer expats this year, certainly because of COVID, but still, as Madison mentioned, a considerably increased number of people utilizing the mail-in ballots. I think I heard 1.2 million mail-in ballots become a factor. So what could be interesting about a mail-in ballot in an election?
Well, one is how many were sent out doesn't matter. It's how many get sent back and how many get sent back by today. That if you waited until the end of last week to mail in your ballot, it may not get counted. And if you were an expat and the mail is slower right now, you had to send it much earlier. So, in a very close race, and we have, every year, every election, there's a race or two that comes down to 100 votes. We had one of them here a few years ago, the Alex Nuttall, Brian Tamlin.
88 votes?
88 votes, something like that. Well, if there was down to 88 votes and there was a couple dozen expats out there, that does matter. So for the ones that are really close, it may be a couple of days before we actually know the winner, because everything has to be counted and then possibly recounted and all of the processes if they're within certain ranges. So if this turns out to be a close election, then every vote does in fact count, and we're going to have to wait for those to be counted and certified.
So it is a tight election, and there continue to be more and more interesting things to talk about. I think if you go back a few years before Andrew Scheer was elected as the leader of the Conservative Party, there was a very tightly contested leadership campaign, and Maxime Bernier, as far as I'm aware, led that race certainly through the first 11 of 13 rounds of that leadership selection, and then Andrew Scheer came out at the end. Andrew Scheer's obviously seen his day as leader of the party, and it's now Mr. O'Toole. But Maxime Bernier is not out of the picture. And so how much of a factor, and who makes up the PPC, and what do they stand for, and how does that impact all parties, not just the Conservatives? Who wants to go first?
I'm going to say I'm still, and I'm looking at the numbers here, and I don't think he's going to be a factor. And I'm just saying, I think that the polling was just, I don't know, and that's just my opinion. I have no.
Well, let me ask
nothing
the
to
question
support that
differently.
whatsoever, as usual.
Okay, but I actually have an opinion, and that is that there are a lot of people who want to send a message, and I don't know what a lot accounts for.
Well,
I don't
who
know
are you
what that
sending a
number is.
message to?
They want to send a message that says the Conservative Party is over here, they're trying to court the undecided, or they're trying to court the Liberal, and I'm over here, more to the right, and Maxine is more, closely representing or aligning my values. So whether or not the PPC gains actual seats, they are getting votes. So we may not see it in the seat count, but if we don't see it in the seat count, is it still a vote taken away from the Conservative, and how does that impact the Conservatives neck and neck with the Liberals?
I think there's a couple of things we need to unpack with all of what you said, and I think you covered it well. I think if you are a regular mainstream supporter of the Conservative Party, for the rest of your political life, you owe a thanks to Andrew Scheer, because he was the only thing standing in between a Conservative Party, not the People's Party, not this fringe right-wing party. One of the two main parties in Canada was almost run by somebody who we now understand Maxime Bernier's political ideas, and right now he's getting 4% of the vote. Would the rest of the Conservative Party go with him to that level? I don't think so. So, we as a political system.
Now when you say that, I'm sorry to interrupt, because this is a great point.
Yeah, keep going.
So the Bernier, it's not that they like him or they don't like him. It's his politics that you're concerned about.
Like Maxime Bernier has shown us who he is, and he has led. He's been at anti-mask rallies. He's been at anti-vaccination rallies. He has a platform that is anti-immigrant. He has all sorts of things that are on the far edges of, not big C conservative, but small c conservative politics.
Yeah.
And there is some market for that. And we're going to find out tonight how much of a market there is for that, and how much of that wing has now left the Conservative Party, and then we'll find out for how long.
So I think if you're a strategist, and I don't think Maxime is dumb by any means, and if you're a strategist, the Maxime that we saw when he ran for the leadership did what he had to do to get the votes from within the party. He was going to say what needed to be said to gain the leadership. And then if and when he was successful, then you would see his influence on the direction of the party.
And now we also saw it, though, with Aaron O'Toole. That Aaron O'Toole became the leader of the Conservative Party. Again, this was supposed to be the coronation of Peter MacKay, as much of a red Tory as you can get, from maybe the most red Tory riding in the country, in Central Nova. And that he didn't win. Aaron O'Toole won, and how did he win? He went after the social conservatives, the people who are closer. They may not be PPC, but they are closer to the PPC. And in order to win, he had to go there, but in order to win government, he has to go back towards what Peter MacKay is. And I think what the PPC might be showing us is, if you are a conservative strategist, you're now in a bind, because you have to go right and you have to go left. And that might box them in a place that doesn't have enough votes across the country in enough ridings in order to form, if not a minority government. They might be able to do that, because in our system you can have like 33% can get you a minority government, but to get to a majority, that might be impossible if they have to go farther to the right and alienate those red Tories, the Peter MacKays of the world. Where are they going to go? I don't know if they're going to follow a Conservative Party that goes out onto the social conservative side to outflank Maxime Bernier.
And that's really the great question. I mean, and I think certainly the Conservatives have pressure from both sides. Right? They've got pressure from the right, from the PPC, and then they've got pressure to court properly those who may feel, I think I used the word earlier, disenfranchised with the Liberal Party for one reason or another. Maybe they didn't, maybe Sunny Ways never actually came to fruition. Maybe COVID was a factor in that, maybe it wasn't. Maybe enough promises and enough pandering to certain special interest groups, those special interest groups felt let down. And so maybe those people are wondering, where's their next home? Is it going to be to a red Tory under O'Toole, or is it going to go anybody but Conservative, as we've seen in the past, and go to the farther to the left of the NDP? Just back to the point earlier, though, that I made about Bruce Stanton having had a long relationship with his riding. We're now reporting, I think, 22 polls reporting, and the Liberals are up by 2. It's not definitive by any stretch. However, it's also not a walk in the park. There is a challenge going on right now. And my question is, it's not just that there's no incumbent. There's no incumbent, there's no relationship. And what would you interpret that in terms of the value of the relationship had Bruce run another term?
It's always impossible to sort of guess that, but I think Simcoe North is going to be an interesting riding. Because there is no incumbent, it is a pure, are you voting Conservative, are you voting Liberal, are you voting Green, are you voting NDP? And as a result, if that race, even if the Liberals don't win it, if they are competitive there, if they happen to be competitive in Barrie, Springwater, or Omadante, that is really bad news for the Conservatives, because that means they're probably in places where it's even closer, then this is an indication. Now, the other thing to remember in Simcoe North is that the Liberals are running an incredibly strong candidate. Cynthia Wesley Esquimo is, I used to work with her, so full disclosure, she's brilliant. And she's going to be, she would be a very, very difficult candidate to beat regardless. She's Indigenous, she's was a vice president of Lakehead University. She's a very, very strong candidate. But if it's close.
Well-traveled?
Yep.
She's California, like she's well-traveled.
So if Simcoe North is competitive, then in places like the 905, where the Conservatives have to pick up seats, do those ridings, is this an indication that those ridings are now not competitive? And we'll wait to find out.
We will wait to find out. While you were speaking, the tide has turned a little bit. Like we said, it's too early to tell, but it is definitely a tight race. So talk about, let's talk about here, we talked about the PPC. Go ahead,
I
yeah.
think you want to talk about is
Tell me.
No, I always have this, okay, these are the issues. I remember, and I got to tell you this story, I remember a pollster coming to my door, not this election, but some elections ago, and they did this to me. I said, yeah, okay, come on in. So if you do this, I'll give you a lottery ticket. We'll give you a free lottery ticket. So, it was a very, in-depth. She read me, okay, what's your answer to this question, this question. So we got to this question that said, of the following topics, which one do you feel is most important to you or Canadians? And I said, I'm sorry, it's not on the list. In fact, the two things that are important to me are not on the list. Well, you can only pick from the list. And I said, none of these things mean anything to me. So I am not picking from the list. So I said, just write it in. No, we can't write it in, sir. I said, well, I'm not answering that question because it's going to show up in a Globe and Mail article that Canadians feel blah, blah, blah about, and that's not true. I don't feel that way. And so she said, well, I'm sorry, then we can't finish the survey. And so I said, well, okay, then that's fine. Thanks very much for your... And I said, by the way, does that mean I don't get my lottery ticket? And she said, no, absolutely you don't. So, but what I'm trying to say is, sometimes I wonder if we're force-fed the issues, and that troubles me. When you just go out there and you do the Tim Hortons thing and you sit around and you talk to a few guys, here are the things that people are concerned about, and I don't know that I heard enough about it during the election. In some of these campaigns, and I pay attention. So, housing. My kids are never going to be able. I'm a different generation. My kids are never going to be able to afford a house. What the heck is going on? Where are all these people? Like, why can't we buy? Why can't we afford a place? I'm worried about my job. I'm worried about the taxes that I'm going to have to pay on this. When are we going to be able to people are really concerned about the impact COVID has had on their lives.
Yeah.
And we're talking all kinds of, in my opinion, stuff that's not really, I was going to say stupid stuff, which is sort of not very, but stuff that is not really relevant to how people are feeling. I don't know that they've touched us
Yeah, no, we've got leeway here, by the way, tonight. I want you to say, I think we're being invited to speak our minds, so I'm glad you're doing that.
But I don't know, what do you think?
And I do want to get into that kind of thing. I think that's exactly what we should be getting into tonight. If nobody else at the door is talking about it, we should.
Well, how are you going to build 1 million homes? Affordable homes.
So I'm glad you brought
I want to
this.
know how that's going to happen.
So here are the numbers on that. South of the border, I think I just read in the paper last week, south of the border, the U.S., they're sitting at a deficit of 16 million homes. And in order to keep up with the demand, and I know that there was some talk before we went live here on, what's it going to take, and what type of incentives is it going to take, and Michael, you've got an opinion on what happens when you crush the dream or the nest egg, right? So why don't you share your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is everything to do with politics. Is simply there's one pie and you are dividing that pie, and if you make one slice bigger, you're making someone else's slice smaller.
Now, when you're talking about the pie, are you talking a money pie?
It's everything. It's
everything.
It's time, effort, attention,
Gotcha.
money, taxes, all of it. Politics is simply the allocation of scarce resources. And we have, one of the problems of a campaign, particularly in a campaign now, where everything is down to sound bites and TikTok and little snippets on things. You can't go into any sort of detail. So it's fine for a politician to say, I'm going to fix housing. I'm going to get more people into homes. I'm going to lower the value of a home. The reality of that is, for a lot of Canadians, particularly older Canadians, their entire retirement is based on the value of their home. And they've watched, instead of having stocks because they just don't have that money, people don't have pensions anymore. They have one asset that's been increasing. So they had something that was worth $50,000 45 years ago. It's now worth $1 million. They're going to sell it when they go to retire, and they're going to go buy a condo, or they're going to live in the East Coast, or they're going to do something. If I'm that person and someone comes to me and says, I'm going to lower the value of homes, I'm not going to vote for you. And so that's why we have this disconnect between these blanket statements about, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, without any of the detail. Because people don't want the details, because you're going to alienate another entire group of people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'm going to weigh in on that a little bit. I mean, I live, eat, breathe, sleep that topic, and it is a great topic. And by the way, if any politician had the answer to it, they might as well have had the cure for cancer, and we know that they haven't yet. But we hear, and my gut instinct is that those who are the policymakers, legislators, et cetera, those who sit on top of the corporations that are public corporations like CMHC, you almost wonder what they're thinking and where they're coming from. But you're absolutely right. The average Canadian doesn't have a pension. OAS and CPP aren't going to be enough for them, and so this is their nest egg. Now, you listen to any professional advice from a money manager or somebody who's a financial advisor, and they'll tell you, don't put all your eggs in one basket. I liken this, though, similar to the fact that those of us who have enjoyed the subsidies, the different handouts that some people call it, that have been going around for a number of years, they don't want to switch parties because someone might turn off that tap. It's the exact same thing. The only way, in my opinion, to solve this affordability crisis is to increase supply. And that is absolutely the only thing that's going to do it. When we're seeing south of the border, it's 16 million home deficit. In Canada, it's certainly a few million homes deficit as well. And we're also increasing immigration. You keep having pressure. And the price of the home is based on market economics. It's as simple as that. It's not what's the home worth. It's the same home. And in 1 year, it increased 42%. That's insanity, and that's not sustainable. But the only thing that's going to allow your children or my children to get into a home is if we actually address the issue of supply. And that is a natural, that's allowing the market to dictate the price. Right now, there are all these policies that are coming out there where, what if we incentivize somebody? What if the government comes in with a partnership program through a first-time home buyers incentive program? It's not sustainable, and it's coming out of tax dollars anyway.
So you know what? The real cool thing about being around is that you've been around. But back in 1972, when the baby boomers, in the GTA, back then it was Toronto, but say Toronto, the average price of a home was, I remember this, $35,000. And within a year, those prices went from 35 to 75,000 because all of a sudden the baby boomers just went out and started buying houses. And back then was supply. There was not enough supply. There was not enough serviceable land. Housing prices went, and then we ran into the whole inflation scenario, and interest rates went to 8 to 12 to 14%. And people complained that they couldn't buy houses because interest rates were at 12 and 14. Today, interest rates are at virtually, the lowest that they've ever been in
2%,
history.
yeah.
And we still can't afford them. So the market will sort of settle itself out somewhere along the line. My concern is the floor that are the regulations that we put in our communities, and I'm not arguing against regulation, but the regulations that we have, you talk to anybody that's in the land development business, they'll tell you, it takes them 10 years to get something rolling, to go through all of the necessary, like we can't, so I'd like to know, how are they going to build these properties, 3 million houses in a year or two? They don't have the power. It's the municipalities that, well, you got to have one of these and you got to have one of those. And we need 3 of these and 4 of those. And it takes time and tons of money.
So here's the question, though. We've been in COVID for 18 months.
Yep.
We're into a 4th wave. They're likely predicting a 5th. They're likely predicting boosters. We talk about what are the variables that play here in this election. Well, there's also variables that play in every market, and including the housing market. So not only are we seeing upwards of 200,000 new immigrants coming to this country every single year, and not only are we seeing people living longer, but we're also seeing the health system in disarray, we're seeing the long-term care system in disarray, we're seeing PSWs who used to work through an agency a few hours at this home and another few hours at another home, where they're being told they can't do that anymore. They have got to pick one and stay with one. But you've also got people who are saying, I'm rethinking whether or not I'm going to put my parents into long-term care. I might go for the stay-at-home version of investing in an in-law suite, a basement apartment, or whatever it may be. So that normal cycle of supply from renter into home ownership, or home ownership to retirement home, and then selling that, making that inventory back available to somebody else to take on, that's now been upset by the fact that people are actually not cycling out of their homes at the same rate that they would have been just 18 months ago. So we already had a supply issue. Now we've got an increased supply issue because
That's a good point.
Because people are going to be keeping their parents at home. So that only exacerbates the problem. And many people will ask about education systems. Did they wait until August to figure out what their September plan was going to be? Well, we're 18 months into COVID. What is government doing about it? We can't continue to use the same old ideology and thought process around how are we going to address housing supply. COVID changed the entire game.
No question.
So let's keep moving. But you're absolutely right. I mean, home ownership is on probably the number one, if not close to the number one issue on the minds of Canadians. Affordability, and that includes also rental rates. Right.
You could stop. I think you could impact the market, but again, I don't know if we're being. Let me rephrase that.
Sure.
I don't know that we really understand. I'll try to be a little more gracious. Understand where the pressure on housing is coming from. In the GTA, there are over 100,000, and you can look it up on the internet. There are over 100,000 properties. $1 million homes, because the average price of a home in the GTA is $1 million, are unoccupied. They're well maintained. Taxes are being paid, but they are unoccupied. And the same thing I understand in Vancouver. And I'm hearing stories that there are some places in Toronto where there are blocks and blocks of places that are unoccupied. So this money's coming in from all around the world, and I'm just talking to people. It's coming from everywhere. It's coming from Europe. It's coming from Asia. It's South America. It's wealthy people are moving capital into the markets, and we're feeling Canada's a very popular place. very popular place. So how do you solve that?
And
To Michael's point, nobody wants to see their house price goes down $500,000 tomorrow. They're feeling pretty, because they probably borrowed against the equity to buy the hot tub and the recreation vehicle. It's the reason why we can't get any.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's look at that question. And right now, we've been getting various subsidies and benefits that have been a blessing. Some people are getting their CERB check, for example. And so there was a statement that came out statistically that Canadians were, had lowered their average household debt. Well, wait a few months, and we're now back up again at the highest household debt. And so what happens when those subsidies stop? What happens? And think about it. Again, 18 months ago, people would have been planning to go to Europe. They would have been planning a Disney trip, that kind of thing, and they can't. We've been home. And so everybody literally either bought an RV and went camping, or they went and built their staycation, and they invested money into their home to have a backyard, a pool, a home renovation, etc. So that too played a factor in terms of house appreciation. And for the first time in forever, a pool actually factored into your house's appraisal. Before it was, well, pools only, only align with 20% of home buyers. Now, it's COVID, I can't go anywhere, I want a pool. So people were either putting in a pool or they were bidding up the price of a pool.
2-year wait.
2-year wait. So we've seen on average anywhere between 32 and 35% year-over-year increase in the value of a home. And these are, I think 2 years ago, I'm guessing, I got to be a little bit careful here, but the average home price in Barrie was $425,000.
So I think what we're seeing here, though, is we're having a conversation about a reality for only some Canadians.
Yes,
And one
absolutely.
of the realities of, I think, if not this campaign, and certainly someone like Jasmeet Singh, this was sort of the basis of his campaign, is that there is a growing problem in the country in that we can have a discussion about people putting in pools, and we can also have a discussion about people being excited to be on CERB because that's more than they make in their job. And CERB is not a lot of money.
No.
Great point.
So
Great point.
we now have these haves and have-nots, and when you're trying to have a national discussion, I can't imagine if we had someone here who was 24, who is an Uber driver or is trying to make ends meet and
Gig
asking
economy.
about do you think it's important that we have inflation about around pools? They'd probably start punching us with good reason. Yet there is this other reality that is part of some people's lives, the people who have homes, who got in early, and then the people who don't. And in a campaign like this, it becomes almost impossible to speak to both groups.
Yeah.
And that becomes really, this is why your very first point of this section was about how we didn't talk about different issues. I don't know how you can when we have so many people living completely different lives.
Different realities.
In across the
Interesting.
entire country.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that is another one of the factors that has become not a variable, but it's become a reality and that has changed in the last 18 months. And that is the vacuum that was the GTA. Saw a big hit. Now it's gone back up. Housing prices have gone back up in the GTA, but we saw a noticeable migration. I used the term "drive until you qualify." So your model representative that you're talking about, a 24-year-old who may be entering into the workforce for the first time in their lives, and maybe wanting to leave their parents' home, or maybe in a rental if they can afford to be in a rental, because that in itself is hard to come by. We're at about 1% vacancy rate in Barrie, and you can ask whatever you want and you'll get it as a landlord right now. However, the reality of COVID and working remotely and the availability of fiber and broadband and now Starlink or whatever that is from Elon, you can work anywhere. And so we've seen people who are moving out of the GTA or out of the higher census metropolitan areas and going to Atlantic provinces, for example, or Midwestern provinces because they can get the same home for half the price. And so is that the reality for your 24-year-old or the younger generation? Is that their reality?
I think not only is it their reality, I think it's something
their
that
opportunity.
parties are going to have to consider when they start campaigning, because what we have traditionally viewed downtown Toronto as being people who are center to left leaning, because that's just the demographics. The Montreal, the downtown core is more liberal. Vancouver, even Calgary and Edmonton, if Liberals or NDP are going to get elected, it's going to be in the cities. If the young, who do tend to vote more Green or NDP or sometimes Liberal, if they are exiting, and just there's an exodus of them out of urban centers and into St. John, New Brunswick, and into Nova Scotia and other places, you're going to have to campaign differently because there's different people with different interests. The person who is more interested in social welfare benefits, increased taxation so that there's more benefits to get grants to start businesses. Those sorts of people are not going to be in downtown Toronto. They're going to be in Moncton, or they're going to be in Charlottetown. And not only are they going to be there, those populations are going to go up, and there's going to be more seats there. And so you're going to start seeing a movement across the country of where these pockets, we're kind of used to now, starting out east, red, then light blue, block in the middle, and orange, blue, red in Ontario, and then blue out there. That's going to start changing, and the smart politicians and the smart campaign managers who are running these national campaigns are going to have to figure that out, and they're going to go find the voters and start targeting their messages differently around the country, because you're absolutely right. People are not going to stay in a place where they can't afford, and because there is so many of them now, that is a big angry voting bloc that wants change.
Well, and let's remember this as well. The value of a home for somebody who lives in the neighborhood and wants to sell and buy in the same neighborhood is a different reality than somebody, for example, in the East Coast who's been 3 generations in the East Coast, and suddenly an extra 50 to 100,000 Canadians or Ontarians or whatever invaded their nice, tranquil neighborhood, and now all of a sudden that $200,000 home's $400,000. So you have that impact on the local economy as well. It's affordable for somebody leaving Ontario, relatively, but it suddenly creates a huge headache for those who are wondering what just happened to their own neighborhood, right? So, and from an employer's perspective, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, do.
But you know what, I have a nephew, family member, I'm very proud of the guy. He's got a decent job here and a wife, a couple of kids. They decided to sell their house and instead of living that rat race, and they moved to Halifax, where they were able to buy, and he was able to get, he was a tradesperson, so he was able to get a job. And there are more and more people are moving to the East Coast.
Absolutely.
Because of housing prices. And I think that's brilliant.
It's brilliant for someone who's leaving an area where our average house price of a house went from, like I said, $425 to $450 just 2 years ago, is now $775, and I can move to the East Coast and get more property, more house, more square footage, probably lower taxes for $275 to $350, and pocket the difference, and that's my retirement nest egg that we were talking about. But the other factor is employers
or a little more comfortable lifestyle.
More comfortable lifestyle, for sure. But employers now get to look at it from a different perspective as well. I'm not worried about a talent pool that's within a commuting radius to my head office in downtown Toronto, and I also don't have to keep the corporate headquarters the same, but I can now hire remote. I can hire talent from anywhere as long as they've got a connection.
I just happened to see the Simple North numbers. Did you see them? They were just there, and Chambers has taken a pretty substantial lead.
The CBC has called
a 600-vote lead.
But the CBC has actually called a Liberal government.
Yes.
So they have officially, they've called it.
Yeah.
They have not said it's a majority or a minority, but they have called.
We're barely an hour in and they're calling it a Liberal minority, yeah.
Well, you can see the percentage. It's really interesting when you watch the numbers and the party results. The Liberals, have won, I guess, been declared in 31 seats, leading in 114. But the popular vote, which was 42% sort of earlier on in the evening as we were down getting results from the East Coast, has now slipped down to 36.9. And so that whole popular vote thing is starting to, at the end of the day, the polls will probably be pretty much spot on with respect to.
So this changes the conversation for this evening, and the question that I ask then is, what's changed over the last 36 days?
I think some of it is the Liberals were able to frame Aaron O'Toole as more of a social conservative than he tried to run on. In looking at these numbers, I still don't think we're going to end up with that much of a difference from the beginning to an end.
Right.
And so basically the Conservatives were unable to get traction. The NDP may not have been able to get traction. And what we may be seeing is that the public is locked more into their parties. That we have a set number of people who basically vote Liberal, a set number who vote Conservative, a set number that votes NDP. The Greens can maybe go up and down a bit, and the PPC has not really made much of an impact. And if that's the case, then we have absolutely the wrong electoral system for our population, because we have a system that's only real big advantage is that it produces majority governments, and so we have clear governing. We're going to have a world of probably minority governments more often than not if we are locked into these numbers. And if so, we're either going to have a real serious conversation about, is this the electoral system that makes the most sense, or we have to get really comfortable with a world with a Liberal NDP coalition of whatever you want to call it, working relationship or whatever, because that's going to be the predominant political structure in the country. And we are not willing so far as a population to have that discussion, and something is going to have to give on that.
So we're still a fair amount of time out from actual numbers or actual final results, but I guess a question becomes, right now, really the only parties that are actually showing material numbers are the Conservatives and the Liberals. So what happens to the relevance of those who are not polling?
I'd like to look, that's a great point. I'd like to, the NDP
They got nothing on the board yet. They're not even on the scoreboard.
like this is Canada-wide, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty, that's a surprise.
We picked on the PPCs, I think, quite rightly. Like, we picked on talking about what is the relevance and who are they and what's their makeup and are they a factor, and was it too early to vote for them, or did they need to have a few years under their belt to become relevant? But you could also look at the Green Party, though, and they obviously have faced some challenges. Words like implosion have come to mind, infighting have come to mind. Are Canadians making a statement with that right now, and is it too early to talk about that?
I think this particular election, it's hard to judge the Green Party. They have a brand new, this is a party that has only had electoral success under one leader, and electoral success simply means having people elected, other than the leader. They have a new leader, Anna May Paul. She was very impressive during the debates. And
Yes,
a lot of people.
She was, absolutely.
A lot of people are probably looking at the Green Party and looking at her and saying, well, why is the Green Party itself so mad at their own leader when she seemed to be the most competent person on the stage? I personally believe this is just growing pains. Like,
this is what?
Growing pains.
Yeah, okay.
This is a party that has moved from being a completely leader-centric party to being a national party that wants to win seats in multiple provinces. And they're going through real difficulty in doing that. And I think most parties do have that problem when they move from the first leader to the second. The Reform Party turned out to be Preston Manning and his party. The second he was gone, the system kind of fell apart, and they had to form back again into the Conservative Party. So this is the growing pains that a party is going through when it's moving to its second to be successful leader. But this has been a disaster. And if they were not a party that was built around probably what is going to be the most important issue for Canadians moving forward, all these other things aside about housing and things, it doesn't matter what the price of your house is if climate change has put it underwater. And as someone who just went through the tornado, I can tell you climate change is moving up very quickly on my area of concern. If they weren't a party that was really based around what is going to be an important issue, this could be devastating for them, and they could maybe not recover. I think they will recover because more and more people are going to be basing their ideology around environmental issues, but this has set them back. And in looking at these numbers, if the Liberals do not get a majority government, we could have a really interesting scenario here in which we could lose the Conservative leader, the Green leader, the NDP if they continue to not do well. And if you're the Liberals, you're kind of looking at Justin Trudeau and saying, this is a guy, he had a majority, he lost it, he put all his chips in to say, I'm going to get a majority, didn't get it if this is what ends up happening. Are there going to be disgruntled Liberals who are going to start putting pressure on him to say, well, look, you've had your 6 to 8 years, it's time to move on? We could be seeing a seismic change in the leadership of the political parties of Canada if these results sort of play out as they're looking like they're going to play out.
So Ron,
But that's a great point, because at the end of the day, I've seen all kinds of commentary about how this has been lackluster, there's no leadership, the whole election campaign. But to your point, it's like, just fire them all.
You may see that. And it's because if you're NMA Paul, I don't know why you'd want to continue to be the leader of the Green Party if they are going to continue to try to oust you at every turn. Jasmeet Singh, they're on the board now. They have someone elected. But if they don't make real big progress, does he look elsewhere? Aaron O'Toole is going to face enormous pressure that he couldn't beat a weakened Justin Trudeau. And Justin Trudeau didn't, again, we don't know if they're going to get a majority or not. But if they don't, he's spent all this money, he has burned through a lot of their resources for no gain. There is going to be pressure on him as well.
Mm-hmm. So, Ron, Adam Chambers has been declared in Simcoe North, and
I've been watching it. All the incumbents seem to be.
Yeah, we are going to be called away in just a moment, probably to some of the headquarters.
So Chambers was elected?
Yes, he was, absolutely.
And Terry Dowdle looked like he had a big lead.
I actually, you know what, I was so engrossed in the conversation, I didn't see it on the screen. But a question, what comes to mind? Trudeau is reelected. There are those who say, he granted himself some authoritarian power regarding budget, other things like that. He's now being called as, the Liberals are being called as having won a minority government. Does all of that get washed away, and is there a clean slate? Or what do we actually see now? Because we now have another 4-year mandate, basically. Maybe the numbers are tighter, maybe the seat count is tighter. Is there more opportunity to hold government to account in this new reality? And again, we're still too far away to see what it exactly looks like, but thoughts there on that?
I don't. I'm. That's sort of outside of. I really don't have any thoughts or comments on that particular thing, but I'm still thinking about what Michael just said.
Okay, go.
About the leadership, and we could see a wholesale change of all the leaders.
Absolutely. Well, if Jagmeet Singh doesn't actually place, that's going to.
I thought an interesting development, and this year was. I'm just reading his book right now. The former governor of the Bank of Canada.
Oh, yeah. Mark Carney. Yeah.
Mark Carney reading his book on value and values, and Mark stepping up, and he looked like he would be the heir apparent, wonderful prime minister for this country. He's intelligent, he's had all kinds of experience, global experience, he would be that guy, but stepped up and said, you know what, I can't do this because I have a commitment. I'm going to be running the world. So he is the head of the COP26 organization that's going to set the CO2 standards, the climate standards in November, and this is going to be huge. It's going to be huge. So leadership, yeah, you're going to have to to find people that are
Well, that's an interesting question now, isn't it, as well, as in the States, and you can make some money, right? You can campaign well, there are super PACs, you can get a lot of lobbying and influencers behind you, and in Canada, it's relatively modest in a comparison if you take a theoretically both the Democratic scenarios, but who are you going to get to run the country? Who are you going to get to walk away from a career or a profession or whatever that's paying the bills and paying relatively well to step aside from that and put your name forward for public service? Is public service attractive enough for Canadians to find the right people to represent them with the right skill set, the right knowledge, the right moral compass, whatever, to not whatever, to guide our country and to make policy? What does it take?
Well, I think we have seen in the past, and I think something you said earlier is really important, that, and I would reemphasize it, is that every single person who is running here, that there's 338 ridings, and in each one of them there's somewhere between 4 and in some cases like 9, 10 people running. So there's thousands and thousands of Canadians who have just spent the last 36 days wandering around, talking to strangers, asking people for money, attending these events, all because they believe in what they believe in, and they feel that they can make a difference. And so that should be reassuring. First off, that across the country, we have people who are committed to the democratic process and want to make a difference. When it gets to the leadership side, then it becomes more challenging. And if we are entering a world where campaigning is as nasty and at times dangerous as this one has been, then I think that's the even scarier part, because it's just not going to be worth it. If you are Mark Carney, the Liberals could come to you and say, we'll set it up so that you're going to, you'll be the leader and you'll be able to run, you'll be prime minister and all this. But do you want to put your family through what Justin Trudeau just went through?
Yep.
With people saying horrific things about his wife,
yes,
throwing gravel at him, trying to run his bus off the road, all these different things.
Totally unacceptable.
That, to me, is the scariest part. And we are seeing around the world. This is not, we always look at the Americans and say, well, that's something crazy. And they're, in the United Kingdom, Joe Cox, a member of Parliament, during the Brexit campaign, was murdered for campaigning in favor of staying in the European Union by a complete far right zealot. This is happening more and more, and it's only a matter of time before something really tragic happens. And I think we have to spend more, we have to, as collectively, whether it's COVID and people are worked up or what, we're not going to get good people to run if it is not worth it to them and their family. It doesn't matter if it's to make money or anything else. If they really believe it, they're going to run, and good people are going to run in any of across the NDP, the Conservatives, the Liberals, the Greens, even the Bloc Québécois, they have their own ideology. But if it's not safe, if it is dangerous and it is vicious and there's so much vitriol, you're not going to get good. You're only going to get the zealots who are willing to deal with that across the ideology. And then we're weaker as a country democratically.
And I'm curious of the silent minority, or the silent majority, excuse me, because we probably saw fewer signs out there than ever before, and I don't know how much of it was because I don't want you coming to my door, because you could certainly dial in or email in for a sign, but there is, again, there's been a sentiment that we are a country that is as divided as ever at this point, and if you look at the numbers the way they are right now, I guess we are. But Ron, I think you bring up great points, and I love your argument, Michael, in terms of, we need to do better as humans. We need to back off the throttle a little bit in terms of the insults, and remember how we're supposed to respect each other. Even if you have a different ideology, we can still have an intelligent conversation. So, here's hoping for that. Terry Dowdle was just declared in Simcoe Grey by a pretty good.
Yeah, I don't see any upsets in our area.
Pretty good margin. I think he won by about 1,100 votes there. But
I want to
sir,
draw
go
your
ahead.
attention to the party results again. These numbers are
Yeah.
changing, and you know what? Stuff is. This might be a little bit closer than, unless I'm. Yeah, so 147, and the Liberals are leading in 104, which gives them, 151. So
I'm going to.
170 for a majority.
Yeah, they're not going to get, I don't think there's not enough votes once we get past Ontario to get to 170. So.
So we are likely, we're moving over to see Doug Shipley make an announcement, I believe, right now.
He won.
Do you want to go to the bar, or do you want to just up here?
We've got mostly everybody up here, so yeah. I know.
Do you
Yeah.
want to just test really quick? Check.
Check, test, check.
Try again.
Check, test, check. Yeah.
Good. Do you want to?
Good.
Okay.
All right. Thanks. All right. Hey, everyone. So thank you for being here with us tonight for our campaign wrap party. It's great to be surrounded by so many friends and supporters as we're watching the results come in. For anybody I haven't met over the last few weeks, I'm Erin. I'm Doug's campaign manager. I've actually had the honor of being Doug's campaign manager. And I do say it's been an honor because Doug has been a great MP, a strong advocate for our riding, and always dedicated to serving the people he represents. Beyond that, Doug's been a great candidate. He's run a clean campaign and been respectful to his opponents on the ballot every step of the way. Doug's worked alongside our incredible team of volunteers, knocking doors, installing signs, and taking the time to return many calls and emails in the past 35 days. And I'm sure you would rather hear from him instead of having me talk about him. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the man who inspired us all to be here tonight and to get involved in some way. Please welcome Mr. Doug Shipley.
Well, thank you, everyone, and thanks for being out here tonight. I know it's a work night. I know it's a late night, but I do appreciate it. This is a special time for myself. It's nice to get out and see so many friends, family, supporters who've helped me through this cause over the last 5 weeks. I'm going to keep this very short because I do know it is a late night. And I'd like to say, first of all, thank you to all the supporters and the voters across the area. I know on TV they're declaring us on many channels the winners already. And I'm hoping that holds up. It's a little early to me, but if that does hold up, I'm very humbled and gracious to be once again representing Barrie Springwood Oro-Medonte for the next number of years. I know it doesn't look like we're going to be forming government, which is obviously disappointing, but considering Mr. Trudeau held this election for one reason and one reason only, and that was to get a majority, we held him from not doing that, so at least we can be proud of that. So, and we can regain Barrie Springwood Oro-Medonte. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about the last 5 weeks. It's been a long campaign. It's been a difficult campaign. It's been during a pandemic, which has made it a little more different. We've had social distancing. We've had masks being having to wear. It was a little bit tougher to get volunteers out. Greeting people at the door was a little awkward, but we got through it. And we tried to always have a positive message the whole time as we were out there, and I think most people in the town have mentioned that and agreed and enjoyed the positive message we got out there. We didn't get into mudslinging or any negativity, and that's the way I always try to conduct myself in politics and in life, and we talked to the other candidates before, and we all agreed to do that, and I think we succeeded in that. So I have to do this quickly because I know at 11 o'clock someone's going to be calling me, so I've got about 2 or 3 minutes, so we will keep this short. I would first of all obviously like to thank many, many people. First up, I would like to thank my patient, very smart and beautiful wife, Lisa. Lisa, would you come up, please? And when I say patient, she needs to be with me, and I know that. My son, Luke, who's here tonight with us. Luke, come on up. Family is obviously very important to me. We are missing one tonight. Our other son, Wyatt, is in overseas at school. We've been talking to him today, and he knows what's going on. And I know he's here with us in thoughts, and he's going to be watching and paying attention. So the other one I wanted to mention was Ollie. Ollie's part of our family, and he became quite a celebrity through all this, and it was nice to see everybody enjoyed his commercial. We kept going with that. So I would like to also thank just a few people. Originally, I had a couple lists here to go through and thank many, many people, but I just couldn't do it. It was 50, 60, 70 different people, and there's no way we could do it. So everybody who's here tonight, thank you. Everybody who's here tonight is because you helped out. You either put up signs, you delivered brochures, you knocked on doors, or you donated. And I appreciate all that, and thank you very much to everybody here tonight. But there's a few special people I'd like to point out if I could. First, I'd like to talk about Aaron, who we love to call as Peaches. Aaron was our campaign manager and kept us in line, and thank you very much, Aaron, for all you did. Marissa, who's not here tonight, was our co-chair, and our canvasser extraordinaire, was out knocking on many, many doors for the last 5 weeks. We have Kayla, who's with us tonight, was in charge of all of our social media, and was in charge of, quite frankly, taking me around all the time, and even got the title by some people as Mrs. MP, which became a little awkward, Kayla, but thank you for putting up with me over all that time. Bruce Plummer, who was here and just had to leave earlier, was our CFO, and Bruce has been a lifelong friend of mine for over 35 years. I really appreciate all his work he did. And Craig Nixon. Craig, you went above and beyond this time with the signs. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And you're also our EDA president. I appreciate that. Scott Gorey, who cannot be with us tonight, who had a heart condition, is in the hospital in ICU. We appreciate all his effort. And Sean Scott. Last but not least is Heather McCarthy. Heather, where are you? Heather, I appreciate all the great work you did holding the fort and for planning tonight's night. So a special thank you to everyone who's here tonight. As we said, let's hope these numbers hold up. I can tell we have to go live in a second with CTV, so I'm going to cut this short. Everybody's here tonight. We can have an extra refreshment or two. There's lots of food here. But once again, we are keeping BSOM blue, which I'm proud to say. And hopefully we'll see some of the numbers change for the night too for the rest of the country. So thank you very much again, everybody, and have a good evening.
So, Doug Shipley declared re-elected by a sizable win, and he obviously paid his thanks and respect to those who helped contribute, and that's actually always nice to hear because at the end of the day, there's one winner, so to speak, the person who gets to get a job or keep the job, so to speak, and then there are all the volunteers and family members who put themselves and sacrifice time and energy. So Doug Shipley is declared. We might as well do a quick recap here. Adam Chambers is declared in Simcoe North. Terry Dowdle is declared in Simcoe Grey. So both, Terry Dowdle is the incumbent there. Doug Shipley, we just talked about, is incumbent. John Broussard in Barrie Innisfil is leading handily there. And I actually haven't seen, where are we, on Dufferin, York, Simcoe, and King Vaughan. So we'll have to keep an eye out for those, but sort of locally in the immediate area, we have a pretty good indication that nothing changes?
No.
Pretty much,
This is,
right?
And this was going to, for anything to change in this area, would have been an indication of a liberal.
So here's a question for you, though. What determines that you're a swing or that you're an area of focus, right? That every single party will sort of look at the map and say, this is a targeted area, we're going to go after that. I would presume Simcoe North was a targeted area because Bruce Stanton deciding to retire.
It puts it on the map. I think, I'm not in the rooms, but I suspect in each of the political parties, they have the list of 338. They have the ones we don't have to worry about because they're in the bag, the ones we are not going to win, and then there's this small number of, these are the ones we have to win and would like to win. And they do the polling, that's where they're going to spend their resources, that's where they're going to spend time, that's where they're going to put their leader. And so, in whether it was Simcoe North, the Liberals sent Justin Trudeau into downtown Barrie on the very first day, which meant that, or the second day of the campaign, which means that it was at least on their radar of probably a nice to have. You do those ones early, the ones you really got to win, you go too late. Other places, where it is more wide open or it's really competitive based on polling, that's where we're going to put a lot of resources. During the break, we were talking about the riding of Sudbury, which one that I know particularly well because a former colleague is running there. Jasmeet Singh went to Sudbury twice. Justin Trudeau went once. That's a pretty good indication that both of those parties had identified that riding as one that they both had to win. So it is sort of, again, it's politics. It's scarce resources. We have a set number of days. We have 36 days. Our leader can only be in so many places. We only have so much money. Where are we going to put our resources? Where are we going to campaign? And where are we basically going to punt and just say either, we're going to win this one easily, or is not going to happen. You know, if you're the Liberal Party, are you going to send Justin Trudeau to Red Deer?
Now, what was the demographic, or what was the makeup, right, of Sudbury? So it's a mining town, it's a union town, it's a government town, it's an education town, and these are all reasons why the Liberals and NDP picked it as a area focus.
They would have looked at past results and say, you know, it was a riding held by the Liberals, but Sudbury is more of an NDP town. The NDP has won it in the past, and they're constantly doing their research. Parties operate long after elections take place, and starting probably next month, the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party and the Greens and the NDP are all going to look and say, okay, when the next election comes, because if this is a minority government, it's looking more and more like it's going to be a minority government, it could fall at any time. You know, when we talked about, you know, people being mad at Justin Trudeau for calling this election, people need to remember, Erin O'Toole voted in votes of confidence against the government throughout the pandemic in 2020 and 2021, which meant he was willing to bring down the government and go to an election.
Fair point.
In 2020, when, you know, we didn't have a vaccine, and we could have had this election taking place in a COVID world without vaccine.
Wow. That's a heck of a point. Yeah.
So all of these parties are going to have to be ready in a minority situation to go at any time. And so they're going to be doing their research right away to figure out in the next election, how do we get, you know, as I mentioned earlier, we may be stuck in this box of minority governments, but how do we get out of it and targeting different places?
So let's do a couple things real quick, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about kingmakers, and we'll talk about the potential for coalitions or that kind of thing, and how they may influence what the next 4 years look like. John Broussard, the incumbent for Barrie Innisfil, has been declared, and we have an opportunity to go and check in with the Victory Party over at Terry Dowdle, incumbent, who was just recently declared as well. So we'll go check in on their party.
Congratulations, Terry. You've been re-elected in Simcoe Grey. How are you feeling?
Well, I'm overwhelmed, Steve. It's fantastic to be here again after 2019. COVID's been hard on all of us, but I can tell you, I think the work of my employees, the work of the crew that I have here that are working the doors, is really why we won tonight. It's certainly not me. I have such a great team around me that wants to make sure that this Conservative riding remains Conservative.
You've had such a limited time on this campaign, yet you have such a big riding. How did you get around so much? And it's just huge. I mean, how do you spread yourself out?
Well, Steve, it's quite interesting. I wish I had my other belt on. I went down 3 sizes. We were out every night. We were knocking doors. We'd hit certain areas. A 36 RID is too short. Quite frankly, you can't hit everywhere. My riding's too big. We have 145,000 people now. I think we're the second or third largest riding in all of Canada. So it is going to change at some point in time. They're going to look at it. Most MPs represent 80,000, maybe to 100. I'm at 145,000. So it is absolutely huge in population, huge in landmass. But I have a great team, and they're excited. We have a lot of fun when we go out. When we knock doors, we make it about having fun. And that's why they come last election, and the same ones are back again this time.
Well, tell me, what are your constituents, what are they saying out there? What did you find are the big issues out there?
I would say, Steve, the number one response, no matter what party you were with, so this goes for all parties when I knocked the door, was, why are we having an election now? That was never answered, quite frankly, as far as I was concerned, by the Prime Minister. People are frustrated during COVID. Stay home. Why are we going out? Why are we having the election now? That was a big issue. Another one was seniors. Seniors has been huge. Prior to COVID, they were falling behind. Magnified during COVID. He'd give money to 75 years and older. Under 75, they didn't. A lot of frustration from people, and this goes to parents who had their kids still at home, or just younger people as well. Will I ever buy a house? Can I ever afford a home? That was a huge issue. And then the third one, which our party, it's still early, I hope we win, certainly for this riding, is that I've heard consistently because of COVID, was lack of good internet and the price of internet. And we've said in our campaign, which I think is fantastic, within our term, the 4 years, we want everyone in Canada hooked up, because we know how important it is. Mom and dad were at home because of COVID. The kids weren't going to school. They can't have those big bills, and we have to make sure that we have great connectivity for those individuals. And it's actually kind of embarrassing with Simcoe Grey, this close to the GTA, that there are so many areas that have actually like lousy internet. So those were probably the top issues that I heard each and every day at the door.
Well, there's a lot of work to do for you and your party. So congratulations once again, and good luck in the future.
Thanks, Steve. It's like I say, I'm really excited, but really what it all comes down to is we have a great team, and I think people wanted to change. I'm hoping the results will show that. It's still early, but I'm excited to be back, and I always, I'm so proud and honored to represent Simcoe Grey.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
No surprises.
So congratulations go out to Terry Dowdall on his victory as incumbent in Simcoe Grey. And we're watching the numbers at this point here, and we're watching really with a keen eye on who's leading where. And Ron, obviously, your thoughts on where the NDP are sitting right now as compared to what the expectation was as recent as today?
At this point, from the numbers, the NDP popular vote is down 4% from the polls, but that could be still, there's more votes to come in BC. I have a feeling they're going to be very strong there. But here in our, if we talk locally, all of the incumbents look like they've retained their seats.
Yeah, so we were talking just before we went out to see Terry Dowdall. We were talking about sort of the focus areas and the areas that were of interest or in trouble, and one of the comments was made that Jason Kenney is obviously a factor, and are there people who are voting against Jason Kenney in their federal vote? And so obviously O'Toole's been out in that region more than what was anticipated, and was that an early telltale sign about a week or so ago that he was spending more time than anticipated out there?
Oh, absolutely. But again, if you have your list of places that are safe, if you're the Conservatives, you probably want to put all of Alberta in that, because that's a place you don't have to go then. And in 36 days, you have the ability to see maybe 70 ridings if you're really moving along. If you want to really go across the country, you're probably going to get to 70, 80 ridings. If you're spending any time, if you're the Conservatives, in Alberta, that's a day that you are not in the 905 region. And that's where elections these days are won and lost. And so if Aaron O'Toole, who is from the 905 region, is not campaigning in his backyard, and they are out in Alberta, or they are in Saskatchewan, or they are in some other places, that's a really bad sign. In the same way that if Justin Trudeau is spending time, which he did, in Toronto, that means that he was trying to shore up support that he should normally have. And certainly I think the Jason Kenney issue, and then what happened in the last few days about Alberta basically finally admitting to the realities of their very poor COVID policies, has made Aaron O'Toole's life a lot more difficult. And that is something in the last week of the campaign you don't want. That you have sort of your messaging each day that you want to have, and you want to build up to that last week, and you don't want a curveball thrown at you. And certainly what happened in Alberta forced the Conservatives to play defense at a time where you want to play offense.
Mm-hmm. So there's winning the 416, there's winning the 905. What about Quebec as a factor? I mean, that's always been said, if you can't win Quebec, you're in trouble. So
I'll have to see what the actual breakdown is. You see the Bloc has got 30 leading or elected. That is about where they were. Mm-hmm. So I think it looks like, in looking at these results, pretty much everyone held serve. To use a sports metaphor, we're going to end up in a world that looks very similar. We're going to wake up to a world that looks very similar to the one that we went to sleep at.
And the People's Party didn't have the split that everybody thought they would. I'm going to say they got a little more, but they're saying 10%.
Yeah, and I think what that shows, and it's going to go up a little bit as more of the Western provinces fully come in. We have been concerned about the anti-vax movement, the anti-mask movement, that this is this subset, this angry group of people who are protesting and doing all these things. We didn't know, because they were so loud and they were so active, we didn't know how big they are. We now know how big they are. They're not big. This is a very small minority of the country that is that much against the vaccination movement, the masking movement, that we need to start treating them as such. That just because they're loud and public doesn't mean that they represent this big groundswell of support. That this is an indication that they are very much on the edges of the political movement. And when we think about policies like vaccination mandates or passports or masking and these sorts of things, and you're worried politically about the backlash of it, this is the proof that the majority of Canadians support the various parties that believe in these things.
Well, it's posturing and it's talk until the numbers actually come in, and I think that that's a great point. A couple years ago, we saw the silent majority speak in Ontario and elect Doug Ford, progressive conservative government. You're absolutely right. In comparison, you see a lot of, if you will, noise or a lot of loud posturing and demonstrations, etc. What are the numbers actually showing us? Well, it appears that it hasn't resonated. It appears it didn't convert. In marketing, you call it about conversion, right? And it didn't convert.
No, and that those people may not exist.
Did I hear it correctly? Did you pick up on the fact that Mr. Bernier did not succeed in winning his own seat? So he lost.
So they have no traction. They're 5%. They're probably going to end up maybe at 6 or something. So when we look at when we're covering a protest, an anti-vax protest, and this is, well, there's 200 people downtown, that means that based on these sort of numbers, that those 200 people don't represent 10,000 people. Those 200 people may represent 300 people.
Yeah, so I asked a question, though, earlier, right off the bat, and there's always that question between how many seats did you win versus what was the popular vote. And so the question that I asked earlier was, what are our thoughts on the popular vote? How many people are going to vote PPC or a fringe party, as we've referred to them, to PPC, versus if they don't get any seats but those votes still went to that party or to that candidate, what did that cost the Conservatives? Did that cost the Conservatives the election?
No.
And
think so.
we're suggesting no. I mean, they've got 5% of the vote. It's not the story.
What I want to know is, what do you think, Mr. Trudeau? How is Mr. Trudeau going to sell this election tomorrow?
The people spoke. Yeah, that's what.
What's he going to say? What would you write? What would you say?
Well, what he will say is, what he will say publicly is, the people have spoken. They have returned us to government. We have people we need to listen to. We are going to work. We've already worked for 2 years in this scenario, and we have governed through a minority government during one of the worst crises in the recent Canadian history, and therefore we are going to continue to do so. So it's business. There will be a business as usual.
Will he say, though, that the people have spoken and returned us to government, or will he say the people have spoken and I got you loud and clear, you weren't satisfied, and therefore you've given me a warning shot?
I think he will say the people have spoken and they have returned us to office. And for those of you who did not vote for me,
I'm going to earn it back.
I'm going to, we're in these next 2 years, as we move past COVID, I'm going to, earn your vote the next time. That will be what he says publicly. Internally, they're going to look and say, okay, we now have run 2 elections in which we have not secured a majority. And the Liberals view themselves as the naturally governing party. With good reason. They've governed 75 years of the 20th century. And so if they can't transfer their vote into a majority, the question becomes, is it because there aren't enough voters anymore in the center, or is it they won't go with Justin Trudeau? That's going to be the discussions in the halls of the Liberal Party in the next couple of weeks as they do their postmortem and say, can we get a majority if we have Mark Carney, or if we have Christina Freeland, or if magic candidate X appears? I think the Conservatives are going to be having the exact same conversation.
Does it come down to the fact that Jody Wilson-Raybould was not the factor that she had hoped to be with coming out with her book and her tell-all story, if you will? Stories like that, do they matter?
If we end up with the exact same results, then no. In this case, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And I also think sometimes it is cumulative, that this is 6 years into a government, it'll be 8 years. That's another 2 years of things that people get mad at. When you're governing, as I mentioned earlier, governing is hard, and the thing you can never account for when you were an elected official, you would know this firsthand. You can do all sorts of things and be very popular amongst people about a certain thing that you vote for. But let's say 20% of those people will say, now I will never vote for that person because of this thing. Well, then you lose that 20%. And then the next thing you do, you're going to lose 10%. And the next thing, and it wasn't ever one thing. It was just a cumulative time of disenfranchising your population. The longer any government governs, whether it was the Harper government or now the Trudeau government, they are going to do things that are going to alienate enough people that at some point it will catch up to them. And if you're the Liberals, you have to decide, can we continue on with Justin Trudeau and risk that in 18 months, 24 months, 36 months, or do we try to refresh?
Got it. Well, on that note, we have an opportunity to check in with MP-elect Adam Chambers from Simcoe North. And Mr. Chambers, welcome to Rogers, and congratulations on your victory. And there you are on the screen. I'm going to be looking over here, hopefully looking at you, but congratulations, sir, on your victory. You won decisively, 2,600 votes. Separated you from the second place candidate, and congratulations to you. How are you feeling?
Thank you. Well, it's a great feeling. Obviously, it's a short campaign, but a very busy campaign. Difficult to connect with a number of people given the circumstances in a pandemic, but we ran a very strong campaign. We knocked on over 7,700 doors, so we feel pretty good about the result, and we feel like the people we connected with a lot of people over the course of the campaign.
Well, let me give you an opportunity. You've got the floor, so to speak. Let me pass it over to you. I got a couple questions for you. Thoughts that you might want to share for the retiring Bruce Stanton.
Well, look, Bruce ran in 5 elections. It's at least 15 years. I think he's in his 16th year. What a wonderful legacy he leaves here in the riding. Strong constituency representative, very visible. When we spoke to people across every part of the riding, in every corner of the riding, everyone had nothing but great things to say about Bruce. Just his approach, his demeanor, his willingness to work with anybody and everybody to advocate for the people here in Simcoe North. So he leaves such a strong example of leadership and servant leadership and public service to follow. I can only hope to be half as good as him, and if I work to live up to his expectations and the bar that he set, and frankly, those who've gone before Bruce as well. We've been very spoiled here in Simcoe North with some excellent representatives in Bruce, of course, and Paul Deverlaer before him, and Doug Lewis, who is still active in our community and in the party. And it's really nice that I can count on both Bruce and Doug as mentors.
So on that note, Adam, I'm going to play. Oh, sorry, Mr. MP-elect. By the way, I don't know how that sounds to you, but get used to it, I guess. I'm going to play a little bit favorites with you because we've got you live, and you are in the local riding that had no incumbent. So this was fair game for all, and that obviously played a factor to a certain degree in the outcome tonight. And you obviously pushed hard and came through. You've already covered the filling the shoes, and you've already covered your thoughts on Bruce Stanton. So I'm going to check those off of my list. But Bruce had the relationship. Bruce had the relationship with his local riding, with the people, the neighbors, if you will, and for over a decade, as you mentioned. You don't have that benefit. You mentioned mentorship, et cetera. What does that mean to you, though, that you've got to start from scratch in terms of building those relationships?
Well, look, we started from anything but scratch. We had a wonderful chance. Bruce left the Riding Association in a very strong position financially, and then from a volunteer perspective, a lot of people who helped on Bruce's previous 5 campaigns really stepped up again. And so I couldn't be more thankful to start this campaign and to start, what hopefully is a a wonderful time here as the representative with a large group of people supporting me. We had at least 65 to 70 people today across the riding that were helping with our get out the vote efforts and our election day planning. So, I feel very blessed to have the kind of support, and a lot of that is back to that transfer of volunteerism and supporters from Bruce to to our campaign this time around.
So obviously the hope was for government, the hope was for either a majority or a minority, and I don't know if you're following the numbers. We are doing our best to follow the numbers here. Question for you, if you go to Ottawa in opposition, what do you bring to the table, and what do you want your constituents to know about you?
Well, look, the job that I applied for was to represent Simcoe North in the House of Commons, so that is the best job, and I'm looking forward to doing that. In terms of what I want our constituents to know is, I'm very thankful for the trust that they've put in me today and tonight over the course of this campaign. But to all of those individuals who may have voted for somebody else, I am very much looking forward to working with everybody and anyone to make sure that we can advocate for the right things for Simcoe North, to make it and continue to make it kind of the best place in Canada to live, work, raise a family, and retire. There's no question we live in a really special place in this country, and I'm looking forward to working hard to keep it that way.
So MP-elect Adam Chambers, my colleague Ron Potasiak's here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see him, but you're going to be able to hear him.
Oh, great. Adam, you got to be really excited about this. You're a young man. What are your political aspirations long term?
Well, look, as I said, the job that I applied for was to become the next member of parliament for Simcoe North, and that is what I'm 100% going to be focused on. Of course, there's lots of pundits and other individuals on TV tonight. I actually haven't even seen all the results, and I'm sure we'll be talking about the outcome of the election for the next few days, but I'm really focused on getting to work on day one for the people here in Simcoe North and advocating for the things we need in Ottawa.
Good for you. Congratulations.
I'm going to suggest that you tune into Rogers Cable 10 because we've got great coverage going on, and you'll get all the information you need. But no doubt in the next day or so, you're going to get a call from your party leader, and you're going to get some, marching orders and what the first order of business is, etc. You know what? We think you've got obviously your plate full and a learning curve, but we wanted to offer you our congratulations. Thanks for taking the time. I'm sure you've got friends and family to meet with, but thanks for taking time to join us this evening, and congratulations to you, Adam.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. And we didn't have a traditional volunteer appreciation or an election night party. So to any of those volunteers who are watching here tonight, thank you so much. We're looking forward to celebrating with you in the near future, and I appreciate you having me on here this evening.
Best wishes.
Thank you.
So, Michael, Adam Chambers, first time, I believe first at bat. Thoughts on his comments and his observations?
Well, I think the first thing that he is right about is that in our political system, and we often forget this, is that your first job is to your constituents. That we have an unusual electoral system around the world in which everybody has one member of parliament, and his job is, regardless of who voted for him or not, everyone in Simcoe North now has him as their member of parliament and has expectations. I think he is about to have a real learning curve.
Sure.
Because business starts right away. If this is a minority, and again, it looks like a minority government, things pick up very, very quickly. There will be the allocation of committees. He's going to have to learn all of the parliamentary rules. He's going to have to hire not only his constituency office, he's going to have to hire his Ottawa office. There's going to be all sorts of people that are going to want things from him, who are going to try to early on get in the front of the queue to get their issues front and center. So he's going to have a lot of phone calls. People will have given him money as part of his it sounds bad, but they give money to campaigns.
Donate to the campaign, sure.
And they're going to be like, yeah, remember when I gave you $2,000? Well, I got this issue.
I got to cut you off just for a second. We are joined or going to visit with incumbent John Broussard at his party headquarters, so to speak.
3, 2, 1, go.
All right, John, so you have been re-elected for Barrie Innisfil. How are you feeling tonight?
Feeling great. We had lots of support this election. Obviously, all our volunteers and family members and friends are here tonight. It was a tremendous effort. It was an election like we've never conducted before because of COVID. We used a lot of technology, and but we did have a very good ground game. We had lots of signs out there. My sign guys were right over here, and so I'm feeling really good, and I'm proud as well because we ran a really good campaign, and it's an honor to be a member of Parliament. It's a privilege to be a member of Parliament. I'm really thankful to the people of Barrie Innisfil for re-electing me.
Well, congratulations again. So we're seeing a possible Liberal minority government. This was a snap election, like you're saying, during a pandemic.
Yep.
Do you think this brought more voters out because, just thoughts and opinions about this pandemic?
I think there was a lot of interest in the election. I haven't seen the numbers, so I don't know whether it brought more voters out. There was a lot of interest in this election. I think people were angry because they saw this as an election that really shouldn't have been called, and they were angry at the Prime Minister for calling it during COVID. So I don't. We saw a lot of interest. I said when I spoke to my supporters earlier after I was declared, we saw volunteers step up like we've never seen before. People that had not stepped up in political campaigns prior who stepped up in this election, and so along the way they don't just become your volunteers; they can become your friends as well. So it was a great campaign.
And do you think that this election was more divided